The wine glass shattered against the wall. Red splattered like blood on my white silk rug. My hands shook as I scrubbed, but the stain wouldn't come out, just like the truth. My husband's brake lines were cut. I had the mechanic's report in my pocket and a silver cufflink in my fist, torn from the sleeve of Sarah's husband as he lunged through my kitchen window. The conspiracy wasn't just Julian anymore. It was everywhere. I'm not just cleaning wine. I'm erasing evidence. And they're not done with me yet. The tires of the silver SUV shrieked against the asphalt of the Merritt Parkway. A sound like a dying animal that vibrated through the steering column and directly into Elena Vance's marrow. She pressed her foot down, expecting the firm, reassuring resistance of the brake pedal. But there was nothing. The metal plate hit the floorboard with a hollow thud, limp and useless. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of silk and bone. The world outside the windshield became a blur of jagged green trees and gray concrete. The wind whistled through a hairline fracture in the window, a high-pitched, piercing scream that drowned out the roar of the engine. Elena gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned the color of bleached ivory. She didn't scream. She counted. 1, 2, 3. The ritual was instinctive. A mental anchor she had used since the day she fell through those rotted stairs as a rookie investigator. She needed to know exactly where the ground was, even if the ground was rushing toward her at 80 miles per hour. She shifted the gear into neutral, the transmission groaning in protest, a mechanical wail that shook the entire chassis. The car slowed, but not enough. The embankment loomed ahead, a steep wall of dirt and tangled brush. 4, 5, 6. She steered into the slope. The impact was a bone-jarring jolt that snapped her head forward. The airbag didn't deploy, another failure in a chain of impossible coincidences. The SUV plowed through the dirt, the sound of grinding metal and shattering glass filling the cabin like a percussion section in a nightmare. The smell of scorched rubber and hot oil flooded her senses, thick and suffocating. Finally, the vehicle came to a shuddering halt, tilted at a precarious angle. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. Elena sat in the wreckage, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. She reached down, her fingers trembling, and touched the floorboard. The brake pedal was still flush against the carpet, a silent witness to a murder that hadn't quite happened. She pulled herself out of the door, the cold metal biting into her palms, and knelt by the front wheel. The smell of leaking fluid, acrid and chemical, stung her nostrils. She saw it then, a clean, diagonal cut through the braided steel line. It wasn't a snap or a tear. It was a surgical strike. The air in Mike Miller's auto shop smelled of diesel, old tobacco, and the honest scent of hard work. It was a sanctuary of grease and iron, a place where things were supposed to make sense. Mike stood over the severed brake line, his face a mask of grim concentration. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single, rusted 10mm socket, rolling it between his calloused fingers. The metallic clink of the tool against his wedding ring was the only sound in the cavernous garage. "Someone did this with a pair of heavy-duty snips, Elena," Mike said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the humid air. He didn't look up. He never looked up when the news was bad. One clean motion. They knew exactly where to reach. Elena leaned against a workbench, the rough wood snagging the fabric of her designer blazer. She felt a cold prickle of sweat move down her spine. I knew it. I felt the pedal go, Mike. It was like stepping into a void. "You're lucky to be standing here," Mike replied. He finally looked at her, his eyes weary. The clinking of the socket stopped, a sign of his absolute, deadly seriousness. This wasn't a warning. This was an execution. Elena reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the edges crisp and sharp. I found this in Julian's office yesterday. It's a life insurance policy. $5 million, double indemnity for accidental death. He took it out 3 months ago. I'm not even listed as a signatory. Mike took the paper, his greasy thumb leaving a dark smudge on the pristine white sheet. He whistled low. $5 million. That's a lot of reason for a man to forget his vows. He thinks I'm just an insurance investigator who retired to play housewife. Elena whispered, her voice hardening. He forgot that I spent 10 years looking for the things people try to hide in the smoke. He's not just lying to me, Mike. He's building a case, and I'm the claim. The kitchen of the Vance estate was a masterpiece of cold marble and stainless steel, smelling faintly of the expensive lavender soap Julian insisted on. Elena was scrubbing a splash of red wine from the white silk rug, a spill Julian had caused an hour earlier with a careless flick of his wrist. It looked like a blood stain, deep and stubborn. Suddenly, the silence of the house was shattered. The large picture window over the sink exploded inward, a rain of glass diamonds cascading onto the floor. A dark figure lunged through the jagged frame, the sound of heavy boots hitting the linoleum like a hammer blow. Elena didn't have time to scream. The intruder was a blur of black nylon and muscle, his hands reaching for her throat. She felt the rough texture of his gloves against her skin. The air vanished from her lungs. They crashed into the kitchen island, a bowl of lemons scattering across the floor, the yellow fruit rolling through the shards of glass. She clawed at his face, her fingernails catching on the edge of a black ski mask. He was heavy, smelling of stale sweat and something metallic, gun oil. He slammed her head against the marble, and for a second, the world turned into a kaleidoscope of gray and white. 1, 2, 3. She reached out blindly, her hand closing around the heavy brass Investigator of the Year award she had kept on the mantel. It was cold, solid, and weighted. With a guttural cry, she swung it upward. The metal connected with the side of the intruder's head with a sickening thud. The man grunted, his grip loosening. Elena didn't stop. She drove her knee into his midsection and pushed, sending him stumbling back toward the broken window. As he scrambled to find his footing, Elena lunged forward, grabbing his sleeve. She felt something snag, a sharp, metallic resistance, before the fabric tore. The intruder tumbled back out into the night, disappearing into the shadows of the manicured lawn. Elena slumped against the cabinets, the brass award slick with the attacker's blood. Her breath came in ragged, sobbing gasps, the scent of ozone and copper filling the room. Her hand was clenched tight. When she opened it, a small silver object tumbled onto the floor. The silver cufflink felt heavy in Elena's palm as she sat on the edge of the bathtub, the only room with a lock Julian couldn't easily bypass. She turned it over under the bright vanity lights. It was an oval of polished sterling, engraved with a set of interlocking initials, MJ. The air in the bathroom felt unnaturally still. Elena felt the blood drain from her face, a cold numbness spreading from her chest to her fingertips. She knew those initials. She had seen them 100 times on the cuffs of Mark Johnson, the husband of her best friend, Sarah. No, she whispered, the word echoing against the tile. She remembered the dinner parties, the shared bottles of expensive Cabernet, the way Sarah had held her hand and listened to her paranoia about Julian's late nights. Sarah had been her rock, the one person who told her she wasn't losing her mind. And all the while, Sarah's husband was the one cutting her brake lines, the one breaking into her kitchen to finish the job. The betrayal felt like a physical weight, a stone pressed against her heart. It wasn't just Julian. It was a network, a conspiracy of the people she trusted most, all circling her like wolves around a wounded deer. She realized then that her support group was actually a surveillance team. Every fear she had confessed to Sarah had been fed back to Julian. Every move she made was being tracked by the very people who claimed to love her. She stood up, her legs feeling like water. She couldn't stay here. But as she reached for the door handle, the sound of Julian's car pulling into the gravel driveway echoed through the house. The rhythmic crunch of tires was followed by the heavy, familiar thud of the garage door closing. The predator was home. Julian entered the bedroom with the grace of a man who owned the air he breathed. He looked at Elena, his jawline sharp as a blade, a sympathetic smile playing on his lips that didn't reach his cold, blue eyes. He began to crack his knuckles in that rhythmic, haunting sequence. Thumb to pinky, pop, 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 pop. "Elena, darling," he said, his voice like velvet over gravel. "You look pale. This business with the intruder has clearly taken a toll on your nerves." "The police found the blood, Julian," Elena said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her soul. "They found the broken glass. And they found no one on the property," Julian countered, stepping closer. He reached out and touched her cheek, his fingers unnaturally warm. "I told the officer you've been under immense pressure at the firm. Hallucinations are a common side effect of extreme burnout, you know?" He was very understanding. Elena felt a surge of nausea. "I'm not hallucinating. Someone tried to kill me." "Which is exactly why we're leaving," Julian said, his tone shifting to something sharper, more commanding. "I've booked a cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Just us. No phones, no work, no intruders. We leave in 2 hours. Pack a bag, sweetheart. It's time to move past this." He turned to the closet, his movements efficient and cold. Elena watched him, the silver cufflink hidden in her pocket feeling like a hot coal. 2 hours. He was moving the timeline up. He wasn't taking her to a retreat. He was taking her to a place where the ground was far away, and no one would hear her count the steps to her own grave. Subverted beat 1.6. As the blue and red lights of the patrol car pulsed against the glass walls of the house, Elena felt a surge of genuine hope. Officer Robert Smith stood in the foyer, his uniform crisp, his badge gleaming like a shield. He was young, but he had a steady gaze that made Elena feel, for the first time in weeks, that the truth might actually matter. "Officer, I have the evidence right here," Elena said, her voice gaining strength. She led him toward the kitchen, pointing to the shattered window and the dark droplets on the floor. "The man was wearing a mask. He attacked me. I hit him with this award. And I found this." She reached for the cufflink in her pocket, ready to reveal the link to Mark Johnson. "This belongs to a man named Mark Johnson, my husband's associate. This was a coordinated hit." Officer Smith nodded, taking out a notepad. "I understand, Mrs. Vance. This sounds incredibly traumatic." Julian stepped into the room then, carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. He looked weary, the picture of a doting, exhausted husband. "Officer, thank you for coming. My wife. She's had a very difficult month. The accident on the parkway, and now this. I'm terribly worried about her." "I have the brake line report from the mechanic," Elena shouted, her heart racing. "Julian, stop it. Officer, look at the window." Smith looked at the window, then back at Julian. Julian sighed, a soft, heartbreaking sound. "The window was broken from the inside, officer. I found the heavy award on the floor next to it." Elena was having a night terror. She destroyed the kitchen in her sleep. I didn't want to tell her, to embarrass her. But I can't let her believe these fantasies. It's not safe for her. Elena froze. What? No, that's a lie. Officer Smith's expression shifted. He didn't look at the window anymore. He looked at Elena with a mixture of pity and professional detachment. He began to count the ceiling tiles, his eyes drifting upward. Ma'am, your husband has shown me your medical records. The prescriptions for the anxiety medication you haven't been taking? I don't have a prescription, Elena screamed. Julian pulled a pharmacy bottle from his pocket, one Elena had never seen before, with her name printed clearly on the label. She hides them, officer. She thinks I'm trying to poison her. It's part of the paranoia. Smith closed his notepad with a definitive snap. Mrs. Vance, I'm going to file this as a disturbed person report. No charges will be pressed for the property damage. But I strongly suggest you listen to your husband. He's trying to help you. If we get another call like this, I'll have to take you in for a mandatory 72-hour observation. The world tilted. Elena looked at Julian, who was smiling, a tiny ghost of a smile that only she could see. The law hadn't come to save her. It had come to provide Julian with the perfect alibi. By reporting the crime, she had handed him the keys to her own cage. She was no longer a victim. She was a mental health crisis waiting to happen. The house felt like a tomb as Julian moved through the upstairs hallway, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. Elena knew she only had minutes. She slipped into the office, the air cold and sterile, kept at a constant 62 degrees. Her fingers were numb, but she moved with the precision of a woman whose life depended on a 3-inch gap in the floorboards. She knelt by the air vent near the mahogany desk. With a butter knife she had hidden in her waistband, she unscrewed the grate. 1, 2, 3, 4. Inside, wrapped in a plastic freezer bag, was her digital ledger, a small encrypted drive containing the photos of the insurance policy, the GPS logs, and her notes on Julian's business meetings. Elena? Julian's voice drifted down the hall, sounding unnaturally close. She shoved the bag deep into the duct, the metal scraping against her knuckles. She replaced the grate and tightened the screws just as the door handle turned. She scrambled to her feet, heart hammering. Julian stood in the doorway, his eyes scanning the room like a predator looking for a scent. He walked over to the desk, his hand trailing over the surface. He stopped at the vent. Elena held her breath, the scent of his expensive sandalwood cologne filling her lungs until she felt like she might choke. You spend so much time in here, Julian murmured. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. Looking for things that aren't there. It's a shame, really. We could have had such a beautiful evening. I'm just packing my files, Julian. She lied, her voice a thin wire. He reached down and touched the screw on the vent. Elena's pulse thrummed in her ears, a deafening roar. Then he straightened his tie. Don't bother. We won't be needing files where we're going. The car is waiting. The garage was a concrete box of shadows, and the sharp, stinging scent of gasoline. Elena was reaching for a box of winter gear when a shadow detached itself from the wall. You always were too smart for your own good, Elena, right? Sarah Johnson stepped into the light of the single overhead bulb. She wasn't wearing her usual silk scarves or honeyed smile. She wore a heavy canvas jacket and an expression of desperate, jagged hunger. Sarah. Elena backed away, her heels clicking against the concrete. Where's Mark? I found his cufflink. Mark is a fool. Sarah spat, her voice losing its sweetness. He couldn't even handle a simple break-in. But Julian has a vision. He's going to take care of us, you know? Once that policy pays out, we're all going to be fine, right? You're helping him kill me for money. Elena felt a cold laugh bubble up in her throat. Sarah, he's using you. He loves me. Sarah lunged forward, her hands clawing at Elena's face. They crashed into the side of the silver sedan. Elena fought back, her yoga-trained muscles lithe and strong. But Sarah was fueled by a manic, terrifying energy. Sarah grabbed Elena by the hair and slammed her against the wall, her thumb reaching for the garage door button. The heavy motor groaned to life, the massive steel door beginning its slow, crushing descent. If you won't die in the mountains, you'll die right here, Sarah hissed, trying to pin Elena's neck under the path of the door. It'll look like an accident, a tragic mishap in the dark, right? The door was inches from Elena's head, the shadows deepening as the light from the driveway was cut off. Elena saw the desperation in Sarah's eyes, the need for validation, the need to be the one Julian chose. With a burst of strength, Elena twisted, her foot catching Sarah in the chest. She dived forward, sliding across the oily concrete like a base runner. The rubber seal of the door brushed her heels as she rolled out into the cool night air. The door hit the floor with a heavy thud, locking Sarah inside the dark garage. Elena didn't wait. She scrambled to the driver's side of the SUV, her fingers fumbling with the door handle. Before Julian could emerge from the house, Elena pulled the small GPS unit from under the dashboard, a device she had installed weeks ago in a fit of paranoia. Her fingers flew across the screen, pulling up the history for Julian's car. She expected to see law offices, mistresses' apartments, or secret warehouses. Instead, the map was a spider web of red lines, all leading to a single point. The Gracebrook Hospice Center. Click, hiss, click, hiss. The memory of the automated hand sanitizer dispensers in the hospice lobby from her own father's passing flashed through her mind. Julian had been there 30 times in the last 2 months. Elena's brow furrowed. He didn't have any relatives there. She scrolled deeper into the logs, her breath hitching. He wasn't visiting a patient. He was checked in as Julian Vance, outpatient oncology. The realization hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. Julian wasn't just killing her for the money. He was dying. He was terminally ill, his granite jawline and charismatic smile masking a body that was rotting from the inside out. He needed the $5 million not for a new life, but for the experimental black market treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. He didn't love her or hate her. To Julian, she was simply a biological asset to be liquidated to fund his survival. He was a man drowning, and he was using her body as a raft. The mountain cabin was a wooden box of claustrophobia, tucked into a fold of the Blue Ridge Mountains where the trees grew thick and the light felt bruised. As soon as they arrived, Julian moved with a terrifying, silent efficiency. Elena watched from the small, barred window as he popped the hood of the SUV. He reached in and pulled the spark plugs, tucking them into his pocket with a rhythmic clink-clink. Next, he walked to the side of the cabin and pulled the phone line from the wall, the copper wires snapping like dry twigs. He looked up at the window and smiled. A jagged, terrible expression. Inside, the wood-burning stove was already roaring, pushing the temperature toward a sweltering 90 degrees. Elena felt the sweat stinging her eyes. The air was dry, smelling of scorched pine and desperation. "It's going to be a long night, Elena," Julian said, entering the room. He didn't look sick. He looked energized, the hunt finally reaching its climax. "Why don't you make us some tea? I'm going to go get some more wood for the fire. It's supposed to get cold once the storm hits. He stepped back outside, locking the heavy deadbolts on the outside of the door. Elena was trapped. She began to pace the small room. 1, 2, 3. She needed a weapon. She began to tear through the cabinets, her fingers flying. In the back of a dusty emergency kit, her hand closed around something cold and plastic. A flare gun. She checked the chamber. 1 orange shell. It wasn't much, but it was a sun in her pocket. She tucked it into the waistband of her jeans, the weight of it a small, burning comfort against her hip. The moon is beautiful tonight, isn't it? Julian's voice was a low hum, vibrating through the thin walls of the cabin. He had forced her out for a midnight hike toward the Devil's Backbone, a jagged limestone ridge that dropped 500 feet into a roaring waterfall. The wind moaned through the gaps in the rocks, a distant choir of mourning voices. Elena's boots slipped on the loose shale. The ground was hostile, offering no purchase. Julian walked behind her, his hand firm on her elbow, guiding her toward the edge. "Do you know what day it is, Elena?" he asked. "Our anniversary," she whispered, her voice swallowed by the roar of the water below. "The day the double indemnity clause becomes active," Julian corrected. He pulled a hunting knife from his belt, the blade gleaming like a silver tooth in the moonlight. "I didn't want it to be like this. I really didn't. But you started counting, Elena. You started looking at the delta between the truth and the story. And I can't afford a discrepancy." He lunged. Elena spun, pulling the flare gun from her waist. She aimed it directly at his chest and pulled the trigger. Click. The damp mountain air had fouled the primer. The device misfired, a pathetic puff of gray smoke the only result. Julian laughed, a dry, hacking sound that ended in a cough of blood. "You're an investigator, Elena. You should know. Equipment fails. Only the motive stays true." He threw himself at her, and they tumbled onto the slick limestone, the abyss yawning just inches away. They rolled across the jagged rock, the sound of the waterfall a percussive roar that filled Elena's skull. She felt the sharp bite of the hunting knife slice through her sleeve, a stinging heat blooming on her arm. She grabbed Julian's wrist, her fingers locking around the bone. "You're dying anyway," she screamed into his ear. "Why do this?" "Because I won't go out in a bed smelling of bleach and pity," Julian roared, his strength surprising for a man with rotting lungs. Elena planted her feet and twisted, using his own momentum to pin him against a gnarled pine tree that grew horizontally from the cliff. The tree's roots, bleached white like skeletal fingers, groaned under their weight. She held his knife hand against the bark, her face inches from his. Julian didn't struggle. He just started to laugh. It was a terrifying, hollow sound that echoed off the canyon walls. "You think you've won?" he wheezed, a thin trail of dark blood leaking from the corner of his mouth. "Look at the time, Elena. I didn't just come here to kill you. I came here to be murdered." "What are you talking about?" "The hospice visits, the poisoning symptoms I've been reporting to my doctor for weeks. The burner phone in my pocket that just placed a 911 call from this location." He grinned, his teeth stained red. "The police are 5 minutes away, and they're going to find the unstable wife standing over her dying husband with a flare gun and a knife. I'm not the killer tonight, darling. You are." Subverted beat 4.1. The sound of distant sirens began to wail through the mountain passes, a low, pulsing moan that signaled the end. Elena looked at Julian. His eyes were beginning to roll back in his head, his breathing becoming a wet, ragged rattle. He had taken something, a slow-acting toxin he'd been documenting, as her attempt to kill him. Phase 1. Smart decision. Elena's mind raced with the cold logic of an investigator. If Julian died now, the narrative was set. The police already thought she was delusional. Finding him dead would be the final nail in her coffin. She had to save him. Not out of love, but because a living Julian could be interrogated, could be broken, could be forced to face a jury. A dead Julian was a martyr. She reached for the cabin's first aid kit, which she had grabbed before the hike. She knew the procedure for a gastric lavage. It was risky, brutal, but it was the only way to keep the truth alive. Phase 2. False positive. She forced his mouth open, shoving a flexible tube down his throat. Julian gagged, his body convulsing, but she held him down with a strength born of pure survival instinct. She poured the saline solution, watching as he vomited the dark, acrid liquid onto the rocks. His pulse, which had been a fading flutter, began to stabilize. He coughed, drawing in a deep, shuddering breath. You saved me," he whispered, his voice weak. Elena felt a wave of relief so intense she almost collapsed. He was alive. The frame-up was broken. She could explain everything now. She had the toxin. She had him. Phase 3. The crack, she sat back, wiping the sweat from her brow. Julian lay against the tree, his eyes closed. But as the sirens grew louder, she noticed a small, rhythmic movement of his hand. He wasn't reaching for his throat or his chest. He was reaching for his pocket. He pulled out a small, high-tech recording device, different from the burner phone. He didn't look like a man who had just escaped death. He looked like a man who had just finished a very successful performance. Phase 4. Catastrophic reveal. "Thank you, Elena," Julian said, his voice suddenly clear, devoid of the death rattle. He sat up, adjusting his collar with a terrifying composure. "What are you doing?" she stammered. "The toxin. It was a mild emetic, just enough to make me look the part. But the emergency procedure you just performed, without a medical license, while I was unconscious." He held up the recorder. "I have you on tape admitting you knew I was dying. I have the sound of you forcing a tube down my throat while I struggled. In the eyes of the law, you didn't save me. You just tried to finish the job and panicked when you heard the sirens." The headlights of the first police cruiser swept across the ridge. Julian suddenly let out a piercing scream. "Help! She's trying to kill me! Please, she won't stop!" He threw himself toward the edge of the cliff, making it look like Elena had pushed him. As the officers lunged from their cars, guns drawn, they saw Elena standing over a bruised, weeping man who was covered in vomit and blood. "Get your hands up!" Officer Smith's voice boomed. Elena realized with a soul-crushing horror that by saving his life, she had provided the physical evidence of torture and attempted murder. Julian needed to finalize her conviction. He hadn't trapped her with his death. He had trapped her with her own mercy. She was now the monster the world would see. The cabin floor was cold, but Elena felt nothing as she sat in the corner of the room, her wrists bound in zip ties. The police were swarming the property, their boots thumping against the wood like a relentless drumbeat. Julian was being loaded onto a stretcher, playing the role of the victim to perfection, his voice a frail whimper as he spoke to the EMTs. Elena's head was bowed, but her fingers were moving. Hidden inside the hollowed-out silver pendant she wore, a gift from her mentor years ago, was a tiny, voice-activated recorder. It had been running since they stepped out of the car. She closed her eyes and replayed the audio in her mind. "I didn't want it to be like this." The double indemnity clause. "I'm not the killer tonight, darling. You are. She had it. Every word of his confession, every detail of the insurance fraud, and the admission that the poisoning was a ruse. She had let him talk because she knew a man like Julian couldn't help but gloat. His arrogance was the only thing more powerful than his greed. The weight of her marriage, her friendship with Sarah, and her life in Greenwich felt like a mountain of ash. She had lost everything: her home, her trust, her sense of safety. But as she felt the small, hard shape of the pendant against her skin, she knew she hadn't lost herself. She was an investigator, and the case was finally closed. The cabin door creaked open, admitting a blast of cold, wet air. Sarah Johnson walked in, flanked by 2 detectives. She looked smaller than she had in the garage, her flowy silk blouse stained with mud. She didn't look at Elena. She walked straight to the lead investigator and handed him a thick manila envelope. "He was going to kill me too," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "Julian. He told me if I didn't help him with the garage, he'd tell the police about Mark's offshore accounts. But tonight, he sent me a text. He told me to disappear because the plan had changed. He was going to frame me for the insurance fraud as his accomplice." The detective opened the envelope. Inside were copies of the secret policy, the bank transfers from Julian to Mark, and the original blueprints for the accident Julian had drafted months ago. Julian, seeing Sarah from the stretcher, let out a sound that wasn't human, a snarl of pure, frustrated rage. The mask finally disintegrated. He lunged toward her, but the officers held him down, the rhythmic pop, pop, pop of his knuckles echoing one last time before the handcuffs clicked shut. Sarah finally looked at Elena. "I'm sorry, you know? I just wanted to be safe, right?" Elena didn't answer. There was no right anymore. There was only the truth, cold and hard as the mountain stone. Weeks later, the Greenwich mansion stood empty, the floor-to-ceiling glass walls reflecting a gray, indifferent sky. The smell of sandalwood was gone, replaced by the scent of lemon polish and packing tape. Elena stood in the foyer, her bags packed. She looked at the stairs. 1, 2, 3. She climbed them one last time, not out of fear, but out of habit. At the top, she looked out over the woods. She had sold the house, the cars, and every piece of jewelry Julian had ever bought her. The money had been donated to a fund for victims of domestic financial abuse. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a business card. It was simple: white cardstock with black ink. Vance Investigations. We find the Delta. She walked out the front door and didn't look back. The sound of her heels against the driveway was steady, rhythmic, and sure. She wasn't counting the steps to an escape anymore. She was counting the steps to a beginning. The silver SUV was gone, replaced by a sensible black sedan that she had inspected herself, bolt by bolt. She climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and felt the firm, solid resistance of the brakes under her foot. She drove away from the glass house, away from the lies, and toward a world where she would never have to ask if someone was with her again. She was with herself, and that was more than enough. The end.